Hi everyone, I'm Jodi Barrows with The Square in a Square. Welcome to our live video teaching. The first thing we're going to do today is we're going to look at the Grande Multipurpose ruler, and we're going to go a little bit more in depth on all the different things that it can do. And this will be a great teaching video so that you can get your full use and the full purpose out of the Grande Multipurpose tool. One thing that I like or that I enjoy is that I am really a simplistic person. I'm not a gadget person. I don't buy every gadget that comes out. I just like my cutting table very clean, very simple, and I would love it if I just had maybe one or two tools on the table that I would use for everything and use all the time. So when I started designing the Grande ruler, I kept thinking about what do I have on my table that I have to grab. I have to grab another tool to do something. So I wanted to make everything really simple. Also, when I design my rulers to put my lines and my markings on them, I want them to be very clean. I could always put more on a ruler, but if it makes it more confusing and then people don't use it, then that doesn't really solve the purpose. So I want you to, when I started thinking about what I needed on the tool, I started thinking about, of course, all the other things that I don't need on my table. So I want you to look at this stack right here. Look at this stack. This is a stack of tools that I would have on my table to help me do all the different things that I want to do. Now, this stack of tools does not even have in it anything to make any triangle units. No flying geese, no multiple sizes of flying geese, no half square triangles, none of that. No other triangle shapes are even included in this stack. So think about what you don't have to purchase, or think about what you're not going to need on your table, and you're going to have more space to be creative instead of always looking for that one item that's tucked under somewhere, or you haven't used it in a while and you're like, okay, where is it? So I have little rulers that help cut my squares. And you know, a square can be in the center of your options. It can be in the corner of a block, all these different squares that are in your quilt. Then, of course, your strip cutters, all of those different sizes. And then, of course, things to square things up. So let's look at the Grande and how you're going to use it and help remove all of these other tools. Okay, so down here on my table, I have the Grande Multipurpose ruler. It is, I think, 9 by 14 inches is how wide that it is. And then also over here, I have the mini square in a square. And the reason why it's up here is because I want you to notice this 4-inch corner square that's here. This corner square is important, of course, to cut your squares and just to do quick checks on how wide a strip is or something. But you need this shape with this angle going through here to do option 39, the trumpet block. So that meant we could only go up to a 4-inch trumpet with this on here. So now when you look at the Grande, you have a 9-inch corner square. So that means we can go up to a 9-inch on the trumpet block, option 39 now. So think about all the different squares, whether they're just plain squares in quilts, whether you're trimming up a unit or a block, you can go up to 9 inches now. Also, you can cut your strips, and we're going to go in here and cut some of this stuff so that you can see exactly how to place the ruler on there. And the numbers go 1 to 8 this direction, and then it goes 1 to 8 this direction. So no matter how you pick up the ruler and lay it down to cut your strips, you have your numbers for you going both directions on there. And we also have the blue line here, just one set of blue lines, which is your 90. So that means it's going to be able to cut your options 1 through 17. And those options all start out with a square in the middle, strips on the side. So look how just with this is how we make every quilt, is starting out just like this. We're going to be able to cut our strips and then cut our center squares. And we're going to be able to cut our strips for this. So this one tool can be on your table, cut your squares, cut your strips, sew them up, and then come in here and trim with your 90 on any of these blocks that are 1 through 17 for your options. So one tool on your table to do all of that. Then we also have a different color line, the red line with a 60 on it. And that is in there so that you can cut your diamonds. It seemed like the thing that people really struggle with in the diamond options is just getting this very center diamond shape that goes in the middle. So you're going to be able to cut your center diamonds, be able to cut your strips to sew around them. Then you would have to use either the mini or the original to actually go in here and trim up your diamond shapes. But what we really needed was something that was very simple to cut these diamond shapes. So that was really how the ruler got started, was what can I make to help cut these diamond shapes? And I never want a tool just to do one thing. I always want a tool to be able to do more. So I looked around on my cutting table, and I said, what do I need to add to this ruler so I can clean it off and get more space to be creative? So let's come in here and start doing some of this trimming so that you can see exactly how the ruler is going to work. So when you cut your strips, most of the time I'm going to turn it like this so that I can cut like this so the ruler would be vertical. So you would do a cleanup cut and then come in here and measure out the width of your strip. And you can see how the lines come down, and then you have your exact markings here at the bottom. So you'll be able to check at the top of your fabric, at the bottom of your fabric, and make sure that everything is lined up great. So let's bring it on over here on this strip that we have ready to go on this, well, not a strip, but a piece of fabric. So let's say that I need 3-inch strips, and I already have a nice cleanup cut. So I'm going to put the ruler over here and find my 3-inch. So here's my 1, 2, 3. I'm going to line it up here. I'm going to check my lines down here. And I want to keep it square. And if your fabric is folded over double like this, then you're going to have 2 folds down here at the bottom and only 1 fold at the top. Now, if you're just doing plain squares, it's really not really going to matter. But if you're going to be using this as a longer strip, you want to prevent any of this crookedness going on inside your strip. And that's where your folds would be at. So you have 1 fold here and 2 here. So I'm actually going to turn my ruler because I want a line down here at the bottom. And notice how I always have part of my ruler hanging off. I don't ever put the edge of the ruler right up to the edge of the fabric, because when you come up here to cut, that's going to wear out the corner of your ruler. It's going to mess up your blades, and your fabric will not get a good, nice, clean cut right there. You'll have to come back and always do that little cut. So bring it down anywhere so that you can have some ruler hanging off. Use your horizontal line right along the edge. Now this will help to prevent this from being crooked when you start to open it up. So line this up first, then come in here and check your 3-inch and keep it straight. So this is helping you keep this 90 going good here on your fabric. And you should learn to use your rulers and use all these horizontal and vertical lines when you're working with your blocks and trimming things up so that you know the inside of your block is staying square and not becoming a screw somewhere. Okay, hand flat. Never cut like a spider. Hand flat. Put your rotary cutter up against your ruler. See, I'm not on any fabric. I'm just on the mat and next up to the tool, and then cut. And if you need to, walk your hand down. Now, one reason why I like the length of this and not a big long one is because the longer it is, the different the pressures are, and things can start to shift. I have more control, and it's easier on me to just cut, you might say, 1/4 of the fabric instead of the 1/2 of the fabric. So here is my mat under here has that little bump, and so sometimes it catches. Okay, so now if I wanted to cut squares, so there's my strips. So now if I wanted to cut squares, if this is a 3-inch strip, then of course I want a 3-inch square. And you can't just come in here and cut 3-inch, 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 3-inch. You have to check the top and the bottom to make sure that it's staying square, that your square is not starting to shift or turn somewhere. So make sure it's nice across the top. I have my 3-inch on the bottom. Now I have a fold over here and I have a selvage over here. So I have moved in just a little bit on my very first one because I don't have a cleanup cut. So then the very first one, I would have to turn one more time and come in here and work. So see how I can get all four sides. So I'm truly getting a 3-inch square that's true because I'm looking at all four sides. I'm not just looking at two sides here and here, and these could be off a little bit. And that's very important when you're working with your basic square. And really, anytime you have a square in a block, is to make sure that what you're starting out with is the best that it can be. Because this is your plumb line. When you come in here and start sewing your strips on, you're matching everything up to this square. So you want this square to be as nice as it can be. And you can do this with your grande. That's what we're demoing here. But you can also use your mini to do it. Now, I want to show you a block here. So think about when you're cutting squares that go into the corners or maybe in the center somewhere of a block. If these aren't straight, then you can't sew them straight. And even if they are straight, you know, then you've got to go in here and do your best to sew them straight. So we're going to talk about these corner units here with this ruler in just a moment. So now you do your cleanup cut. There's your 3-inch square. And you can keep coming in. Now remember, once you start cutting on your fabric and you have layers of it, this is 4. I normally don't ever cut more than 4 layers at a time. And 4 layers at a time, you can use your mini cutter for just fine. And see how I come back in here on the ruler and then go forward. Now, if your pressure isn't good everywhere, this, when you get close to the edge, can kind of move. When your ruler is right up along the edge like this, remember when we cut the strip, how we had some of the ruler hanging off at the top and at the bottom? And that helps so that this doesn't move when you're cutting. So when you're cutting and you're using the corner square, so see how I can line it up and I can make sure that everything is just exactly the way that it should be. Make sure you apply enough pressure here to the end so that that fabric doesn't. Now also, if you're doing more than 4 layers of fabric, that fabric wants to move quite a bit the more layers you have. So I started with my selvage edge and 1 fold, and I worked into the double fold. So now I can flip that open, and look, I don't have a dog leg. And if you do, then when you come in here like this, you can trim up and square up if you need to, if you did have a little bit of a dog leg. So there are my squares ready to go. And of course, those are going to be my center squares for my options, or they could be squares that are other places in your quilt. So you saw how to cut a strip, and you saw how to go in and cut those squares. So now let's look at when you're either trimming up a block or you have, like, see how you have a triangle and a little square? Now, I'm not ever going to cut that square exact. If my pattern tells me that this needs to be a 2-inch square cut, I'm going to cut it 2 1/4. Or if I have some 2 1/2-inch strips left over from my another block or whatever, I'm going to use those wider ones. And if this was a long strip, I would just keep sewing my half square triangles to that strip. Then I would go and press, and I would come in here just like this to trim up my unit. Now the one that's on the inside, I would trim that one, but this one that's on the outside, I'm going to wait till the whole block is put together. But if I'm putting these two on this one, then I have to make sure that this long side is clean to go here and that this long side is clean to go there. So I'm going to clean up this long side, but I'm not going to worry about this over here yet. And I want it to be nice and true with my half square triangle. Because see, this is big, so I can do this and make that square in there anywhere I want. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at my half square triangle unit. I have a line here and a line here, and I can tell that I'm staying true or square to this triangle unit to make that. So there it is. And then I would turn it, and now I have 3 sides to look at. So I can look at my triangle unit, making sure it's staying square, and I can look at my outside line there and make this cut. So now this is perfect, except this is going to be longer than what I need. But that's okay, because when I put this corner unit together, and then I put my whole block together, then I would come in here and trim that up. So let's look at that. I'm not going to really cut it, but let's look at that. So you could use your lines. Let's say that it's 3 1/4 here. I can look down here and make sure it's 3 1/4. And I can keep my block square, not just trimming up my edges, but actually keep the sewing and the lines in here square. You can come in here and look at all these other lines that are going horizontal and vertical, and you can tell, is my piece in here staying square, or is it becoming too crooked? Then you can come in here and trim on your outside edge. But always remember, you've got to have that 1/4 of an inch on this outside edge. Don't trim it up and go all the way in. Now on this one here, notice how we put this same shape. You can see here and here, here and here. And we just trimmed up this inside edge, just one side of this one and one side of this one, so that we could make that seam. And look how nice and perfect. So when you're doing it like this, you don't have to worry about, is my square coming out long enough? Is it matching up the way it should? All you have to do is worry about this center corner. And look how nice and perfect it is. And of course, I don't even use pins. So when you come in here, so this was my seam right through here. So this was a nice cleanup edge, and this was a nice cleanup edge. And then I'm going to do that 4-patch pop. So see how I grab that seam just 1/4 of an inch over from this one going vertical, and I'm right on the one going horizontal. And I'm just going to twist it until it opens like that, and you see 4 pretty little squares, and that's the 4-patch pop. And then I'm going to press it and see how that seam just kind of turns like a pinwheel. And that way this seam is more evenly distributed underneath here on the seam allowance side. Otherwise, it would all be thick and bumpy like that. And you have a lot of action going on here in the center. But this helps move it into half. And anytime you have 4 squares coming together in a 4-patch, actually these are 4 units coming together. So also in your pinwheel, you're going to have 4 units coming together. So you can do that pop on there, and look at that cute little pinwheel there on the back, and see how those seams all are more evenly distributed. So now if this was ready to go into my quilt and I was ready to trim it up, I would come up here to this corner square unit, and I would check up here. This triangle is what I'm checking, and I'm putting my 1 1/2 right in there. So this means that all of this is going to stay nice and square and true. Okay, so I'm going to come in here and I'm going to trim this. And I can do this one. And then I can come in here and I have my looking at mine. And then if you need to check your outside, and there I have that nice, perfect little hourglass shape with those little pinwheels. Those little half square triangles. Now look at this one with flying geese. Once again, anytime I have a solid square or solid rectangle, solid piece, I'm going to overcut it. I'm going to cut it just a little bit larger so that I can come in here and make it perfect. Because you can't cut these squares and rectangles perfect. And you can't sew them next to your work. Now the square and a square system has already perfected your half square triangles, your flying geese, all of your triangle units. But now you have a human element here with seams. Every seam represents a cutting, a sewing, and a pressing, and you're adding 3 human elements to every seam. So now whatever you needed it to be, if you needed to go ahead and trim this one up, you could. Or you can just trim up the side. If this is on the outside edge of a block, then I'm going to wait and not trim this one. So there you can see how you overcut. And this is part of the science of patchwork and of perfecting your patchwork that I teach. How to overcut and trim down on these where and when and how to do them so that you're going to set yourself up for success, not just hoping and keeping your fingers crossed that things are going to work out right. So we've talked about this corner, what we can do. We've talked about our strips and cutting squares. Now let's look at the options. So options 1 through 17 start out with your square in the middle and your strips. You have 1 set of blue lines. hand flat. Now, I want you to think about when your option starts getting big. Some of you are really making big options. This is going to give you, you can make, oh gosh, like a 15-inch block of the here or larger. And as your work starts growing, we're going to look at that over here in just a minute. As your work starts growing and you keep sewing around and sewing around, the large grande will help you with those bigger pieces. Okay. So for an option 1, you would trim all 4 corners, leaving that 1/4 of an inch. And remember, once you start making cuts, to keep it nice and square. So check those lines over here to make sure that your fabric and your lines are parallel and nice and neat. Now, if you were going to do the 2-step for flying geese or half square triangles, you're just going to put the tip of the blue line where it falls off the edge of the ruler right into the tip or the corner of your fabric square, and that one blue line will go. Since I already have some cuts, I can check here and here and see how I'm doing. And then you have this nice grid line that goes right through that point. So any of your options 1 through 17 that start out with the square in the middle, your grande will help you make larger ones. And since there's just basically one set of lines to look at, and you have some color coding on there, I think it'll make this a favorite for you. So there's your flying geese, just like that. And so with all of your options, you're going to leave a 4th or go right up to the tip, no matter which one you're making. Once you know those 2 trims, then you've got it made. So let's look at cutting our diamonds. This is really what started the whole thing, was how do we cut these diamonds and make it easier for people. So we can come in here and check the width of our strip. So we have a 4.5 inch width of our strip. So that means we need to come in here and cut 4.5 inch segments like this for our diamond shape that's going to go into the middle of our basic diamond. So put your, and I always like to have a mat that I can turn. So put your red line, and it says 60 on it, and put it right up here at the top of your strip. And see, we use this to cut our strip. So we've cut our strip with our grande. Now we're going to come in here and cut our diamonds. Just like we cut our strip and then cut our squares, we can do the same thing. Hand flat, get your angle and your cleanup cut going. Don't move your tool. It's exactly where you need it to be. Rotate your mat halfway around. Keep your red line of the 60 on the edge of your fabric. Just scoot it down. We need 4.5. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. So here is my red line here. Here is my 4.5 line. Hand flat. Make your cut. Just barely pick it up. Move your diamond and scoot your ruler on over. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. And just keep going right on in for your diamond shapes. So let's look at some of these quilts that I have now. And those are some of the characteristics of the diamond. So let's look at some of these quilts that I have, and let's see if the grande would make all of it, if it would. So let's look here at the log cabin quilt. So of course, these are your, start out with a little square in the middle. It'll do that. Here are your strips you're going to sew around. We use long strips to do our log cabins. Boom, it'll do that. This option 4 is an option that starts out with a square in the middle. So the grande will make all of this. One tool on your table to make all of it, not multiple tools. And no matter what size you want, it'll do it. So, and then here's the country barn. Country barn starts out with 3 strips. So it'll make your strips. Then you can come in here and trim up those strips to get your 3 stratas. Then you just have strips that you're going to sew around for your country barn. So boom, it'll make all of that. Let's look down here at some of these quilts. Let's bring them in a little bit, Steve, so they can see.
I'm going to have to move the screen first.
Bring these over a little bit. We got a bunch.
Oh, all of them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So this one here is the Road to Nowhere. And if you're getting the country barn pattern that was behind me, just the big squares, this one here, the country barn and the Road to Nowhere, they both come in the same pattern form. So let's look at what we have here. We have strips that we used in our split rail. It will cut the strips. You're going to sew your strips together, and then you're going to come in here and use that corner square and come in here and cut basically your squares out of this new strata. You're going to cut your strips and squares for your large square here. And for your 4-patch, you're going to cut your strips for your 4-patch, and then you're going to use the 4-patch tool to come in and cut your 4 patches to get your perfect patches. Let's look here at Homestead Star. So Homestead Star, this is your square in the middle and your strips, your basic square for an option 1. It'll do that. It'll cut your diamonds and your strips for your option 18. Now to trim your option after you get this made, you're going to have to use the original ruler to do it. And then look in the corner here. This is what I demoed with our little, I don't know if I can find it. So this is what I demoed here with it, where you're going to have your half square triangles, which are your option 4s, and your plain squares. So it'll cut your strips and your plain squares. It'll cut your square and your strips for your half square triangles. Then you're going to sew them up like we did here. You saw that extra hanging off, and then boom, there's your little corner. So you want to know how this beautiful quilt becomes easy enough for a beginner to do? Well, it's just knowing the right tools and the right system to put it all together. And so this becomes a very easy quilt to do. And this one is the Homestead Star. Now this one here is option 2, just really a fast quilt, an easy quilt. This is just 3 colors everywhere. So this is I think a 5-inch square in the middle. So you're going to cut your strips. The Grande will do that. Cut your squares. The Grande will do that. Then you're going to cut your strips and sew them around and see how large this is getting. And then you're going to use the blue lines with the 90 to trim up your first block. So let's look at how that looks on there. So if this is your center square and these are your strips, you're going to be trimming these corners right here, leaving that 1/4 of an inch. So see with this big block, look how much, I'm sorry, you're going to be right here. So you can go much bigger. This is a nice big block. You can go much, much bigger with it over here. And then when you sew around it again, look at this one. This is a nice big 9-inch block. And look, you could go 10 or 11 inches really, really fine with that. So you can go larger with your units. And this is a 9-inch square. So you may be able to even trim up your, no, you'll be close to getting your big square on that one. Okay, now let's look at this one, the crazy 9-patch. So here we have stratas of strips sewn together for our 9-patch. So we know it'll make your strips. Then you're going to use the 9-patch ruler to trim up your sections and then sew them together. Then you put your strips around here. And of course, you're going to use it right in the corner of that 9-patch center square and trim it up to leave your 1/4 of an inch. Just like you see here. So it'll do all of that. So look at how many quilts we're making with that Grande. Okay. Now this is the pineapple, and the pineapple is just done with strips, just strips. So of course it's going to cut your strips. It's going to cut your center square. It's going to cut your very first option 1. It's going to cut your very first option 2. And then your block gets very wide, and it will come in here and cut all of these sections here because it's so long, it has so much depth on it. Now, with the pineapple tool, with the pineapple block, you're going to trim, leaving a 1/4 of an inch the first time around and the second time around. But usually when you get to the third, see how you start getting these blunted edges on here? So then you're just going to use the edge of the ruler right along the edge and trim up what you don't need. And see how this 9-inch square is going to allow you to keep your block so much more square as you're going around. So wonderful for the pineapple, the Grande. Okay, so my next part that I'm going to do is different quilts and questions that people have sent in. But before I do that, I think Steve has some questions on the Grande that you guys have typed in.
Do you use gripper dots on your rulers?
Do I put anything on my rulers that give them more grip, like a dot or even like a big sheet of something? And the answer to that is no, I don't. I want my ruler to be able to move around on my fabric so that I can use those lines anywhere on the ruler to get these shapes perfect, just like you saw me do this morning. And if I have a gripper somewhere, and first of all, when you first get a tool, you don't know the parts of it that you're going to be using the most. So you may put a gripper dot right where you need to see the most. And so I don't really recommend it. If you will learn to cut with the right height of table, your hand flat, and with a tool that is the right size for what you're doing, and if it is longer, move your hand up as you cut, then you'll be just fine.